FedEx and UPS are the biggest private sector shipping companies. In the United States, they really are the ones you go to if you need to ship something fast.
For the 718th time, we present Camaro versus Mustang.
Many of us rely on them to get around, and I always wonder, you probably do too, which one is better?
It's just one offensive in its battle with rival Pepsi for hearts and taste buds.
At Yale University in 1965, Fred Smith wrote an economic term paper on transportation and delivering packages. His professor was not impressed and gave him a C on the paper. The professor told him that the concept is interesting, but would not be feasible, and to get a better grade, the idea would actually have to be realistic. Fred made a comment on the story and said that he probably deserved the grade because the paper wasn't thought out well. Fred forgot about the paper and went on 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. After returning, he decided to go work with his uncle in his plane refurbishment business. Fred's uncle would often have trouble finding parts and getting them quickly. This is where Fred thought of overnight delivery, which was one of his concepts in that economic term paper he wrote. This is when he started to set the foundation for FedEx. To make shipping as fast as possible, Fred couldn't rely on commercial flights to ship packages. This was the standard before. He was determined to have his own fleet of planes dedicated to just shipping packages. This made it so that they could control the flight's logistics. They also shipped everything through one central hub instead of flying between cities. This made shipping even faster, as planes were always going directly to their destinations with all the packages that needed to go there. To finance all of this, Fred needed some funding for his fleet of airplanes, trucks, and package handlers. FedEx hired over 400 employees before even making a single shipment. This was not a problem though, because Fred came from a wealthy family. He took his $4 million inheritance and $90 million from other investors and began assembling everything he needed. At first, things were really bad. Their first overnight flight only shipped 186 packages. FedEx lost over $30 million in its first 2 years of operation. The energy crisis in the 1970s was really hurting them as fuel prices skyrocketed. It made it next to impossible to actually be able to turn a profit. It got so bad that they couldn't even pay for a $24,000 fuel bill because they only had $5,000 left. Fred flew to Chicago to try and get more funding, but he was denied anywhere he went. In a last-ditch effort, he flew to Las Vegas and took all the money he had and played blackjack. He managed to win enough money to pay the fuel bill to keep the business running. Soon after, though, in 1976, they had their first profitable year, and by 1977, things were looking good. During this year, air travel became unregulated, so they could increase the size of their planes and where they could fly. This made them even more efficient at delivering packages. By 1983, they reported $1 billion in revenue, and were actually the first company to do this in its first decade of business without acquisitions or mergers. 2 years later, they doubled that to $2 billion, but this was done through the acquisition of international shipping business Flying Tiger. FedEx were the ones that started the express shipping business, and to think it all came down to a few hands of blackjack. But enough about FedEx, let's switch over to UPS. UPS started 64 years earlier than FedEx in 1907. The start of UPS wasn't as dramatic as FedEx. It was started by 19-year-old Jim Casey with just 6 bicycles. FedEx and UPS were started by one key person that spent their entire life building up the business. UPS started not by delivering packages, but would deliver telegrams. The popularization of telephones made this unnecessary though, so they pivoted to delivering department store packages. By the 1950s though, people had more access to cars, so they would just drive to the store themselves and go shopping for whatever they needed. This lowered the demand for the UPS service. UPS was forced to shift again, and this time into what they are doing today, which is delivering packages for the public. UPS started their international service to Canada in 1975, compared to FedEx in 1980. It didn't take long for either one to focus overseas to Europe. They both started acquiring smaller European shipping companies. Price wars between the two started, and as they were trying to undercut each other, this made it difficult for either one to make a profit in the international market. In the 1980s, UPS started to catch up to FedEx in their overnight deliveries. One of the biggest difference, though, is how they obtain their funding. UPS is more conventional on where they get their money from. This is compared to FedEx. Within only 5 years of operation, they took their company public. It wasn't until 1990, after 90 years of operations, UPS became public. Before that, it was only owned by employees and a few investors. Historically, UPS hasn't taken out a lot of debt either, but rather used their own profits to expand. In 2001, UPS bought a company called Mailboxes, etc. for $191 million. All 4,300 locations were rebranded to UPS stores. In 2003, FedEx followed in their footsteps, but in a more FedEx way. They bought Kinko's for $2.2 billion and rebranded them to FedEx Office. The biggest difference today is that FedEx is known for their air deliveries, while UPS is known for its ground deliveries. This doesn't mean that they both don't offer air and ground delivery though. This is even seen in pop culture, such as Castaway. It was a FedEx plane that crashed, and not a UPS one. Also in the show King of Queens, he works for IPS, which is a spin-off of UPS, and he makes ground deliveries, not air deliveries. But as time goes on, these two companies are becoming more and more similar. UPS is the 41st largest US company, while FedEx is the 47th. In 2018, UPS saw $71.9 billion in revenue, while FedEx saw $65.4 billion. UPS delivered over 20 million packages per day, while FedEx delivered over 14 million packages per day. For US deliveries, UPS is the winner, but for international deliveries, people are more likely to use FedEx. FedEx continued to fight for international market share with the acquisition of European delivery company TNT Express for $4.8 billion in 2015. These two companies are very similar, but started in very different ways. However, in the future, they might have to fight off a bigger company coming into their space. And with that being said, as always, thanks for watching, and like and subscribe to see more.